Hi folks, how are you doing? My name is Danny and I am alcoholic. This is the second in a series of 4 talks sharing my experience and knowledge on my recovery from alcoholism through the solution found in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an attempt to offer strength and hope through sharing my personal journey of recovery. Last time I shared about the problem, step 1 essentially. This time I will begin to talk about the solution, the power, as well as the decision to turn towards that power. So essentially what's known as steps 2 and 3. I'm going to begin where I ended last time with the final paragraph on chapter 3, more about alcoholism, page 43, right at the end. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defence against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defence. His defence must come from a higher power. So the point is that we're not only are we powerless over the decision of whether we drink or not, but we're also beyond human aid. So we need to find a power that is greater than our human selves, that will restore us to sanity over the decision, that will relieve us of the illness and enable us to live happily and freely in the world. That's the whole point of recovery actually, isn't it, if you think about it? The whole point. But therein lays a problem for many folk. It certainly was a problem for me. Yes, obviously I didn't want to die of this illness, but I could not believe in a power greater than myself, let alone believe that it could help me, that it could restore me to sanity. Now the problem was that I misunderstood what was being asked of me here. At step 2, you're not being asked to believe in anything, just to be open to the possibility actually. Step 2 states, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. This is a process, and I did come to believe eventually in both of these propositions, but I didn't believe at the beginning. In truth, the first thing I had to actually come to believing was personal powerlessness, and also that no one else could give me the power, could do this for me, although I did try that one for a little while, until I fell apart sober, of course. So first things first, I had to accept that I was truly hopeless, and from here, hope could grow. Interestingly, actually, linguistically at least, hope and despair are linked. Despair is a state of hopelessness, really. Hope grows from a place of despair. In the French language, they share the same linguistic root, désespoir and j'espère. And in recovery, of course, we experience an old word that you don't hear much these days, respect, which is a new hope or a fresh hope, if you like. But you have to be beaten into a state of reasonableness to be open to the possibility, or certainly I had to be anyway. And it's important to remember in the book that Bill was only open to the possibility of the hope that he saw in Ebbe because he knew that he was hopeless himself, that there was no other game in town left open to him. And so he listened to his old mate, because there was no other option, there was nowhere else to turn. It was either that or an alcoholic death. So he thought he'd give this guy a go, a listen, even though he was very, very sceptical. Now, surrender is also not a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It grows deeper as we move through recovery. I recall vividly my first surrender that led to physical sobriety. I shared it last time. Well, I shared, there were 2 moments, if you remember, each one a year apart. One to the physical that brought me to the rooms in the first place, and another a year later which made me realise that I needed this solution to stay sober. When I came, I'd had enough of drinking. After a year of relapsing, I was ready to take certain steps. At this point, of course, I thought I was willing to do anything to get sober, but the truth is, I wasn't. I soon started negotiating. But what I was ready to do at this point was to take certain steps. and I did take certain steps, but I don't think I was yet ready to go to any lengths. That came with more pain, I'm afraid. So I came back after the final debauch, to use here language, and threw myself into recovery. I was talking to everyone, asking their advice, even asking about the solution, the steps, what the heck they were all about. I recall vividly talking to two old-timers, one of which told me not to rush into things, that actually I sounded too desperate, almost too eager. And a few days later I spoke to another old guy who told me, and I told him about this conversation I'd had with the other old guy. And it was really interesting what happened. He looked at me, he looked straight into my eyes and asked me, "Danny," he said, "Danny, how long have you been coming?" And I said, "Oh, I've been coming about a year." And again he looked into my eyes and then said back to me, "Well then you're hardly rushing, are you?" No, I wasn't, but it certainly felt like it. I was very confused. I listened to the second man, and my goodness, I'm glad I did. And within a few days, I'd asked another man to help me. I often wonder what would have happened to me if I'd taken on board what the first man said and not had that second conversation. But who knows? Can't really say, can you? So I asked a man to help me, and we went through a version of the steps together, shall we say. I got better, but I did not grow spiritually. And for the final few months of that first year, I got spiritually sick. My life fell apart. My world shrank. I just could not live in life. My mind raced beyond anything it had ever done before. It was worse than when I was drinking. I could not sleep. I was utterly terrified. I was raging. It wasn't anger, it was deep, deep rage about everything. And then I was deeply depressed. Suicidally depressed, if I'm honest. My mind was focused on ways to get out of this life without anybody thinking that I'd tried to get out of this life. I lost my career. I could not function. I lost my career sober, not when I was drinking. I would find myself lying in bed at night, eyes wide open, mind racing. I would nut the walls to try and stop my mind from just racing, to try and slow down my thoughts. I was gone. The thoughts were not just like a washing machine, like a rhythmical. There was no rhythm to my thinking. It would shoot all over the place. There were two occasions when I came very close to relapsing. But thank God I didn't. Yeah, I realised then that my life was completely unmanageable. I could not manage my own life. My thoughts, my emotional nature were not my own. I could not get any kind of control over them. They were out of control, and they were ruling my life and destroying my life. And I was almost a year sober at this point. I must have attended 500 meetings. Gone through the steps, but not grown. The spiritual malady had me in a vice-like grip. Thank God I surrendered on a deeper level, and I asked another man to help me. I was now ready to go to any lengths, all that was required, and I've been willing to do so ever since. As I look back, the problem was that I could not believe in a power greater than myself. I claimed I was using the rooms and the people in it as a power to live by, but in truth I wasn't. I was still trying to manage my own life. This deeper surrender opened me up to this possibility, and the man who helped me guided me through the book and what was contained within it. He shared his experience and he shared his knowledge. From that day, actually, I began to form a personal relationship with the literature myself, and I have done, and that's grown ever since. And I was open to the possibility of a power greater than myself. I was hungry for knowledge, and I was hungry for recovery. Really hungry, and I still am. When I came to recovery, I'm not really sure I would have described myself as an atheist or agnostic. I had been a humanist at one time in my life, in fact a member of the British Humanist Association. it's interesting that it's not actually what it was. It seems more dogmatic these days. It seemed more liberal and open in the past, but like so many other things, it's become more dogmatic in recent years. The truth is about myself, I had lost faith in humanity, in life, in everything, as alcoholism, as addiction took a hold of my life. I had become, I suppose, a nihilist, for I believed in nothing. My mantra had become that line from The Power of Lard by Lard: avoid everything, avoid everything, avoid everything. Basically, everything is bad. There is nothing good in this life. Avoid everything. There is no good in life. There's nothing to believe in. Least of all myself and humanity, no. All I could see was darkness. A friend of mine called me Danny Darko at the time, from that film that was out at the time, Danny Darko, from the film Donnie Darko. Do you remember it? Yeah, I was a bit like that character, apparently. In that first year of recovery, I was belligerent. I would not even say the beginning word of the Serenity Prayer. I could not mouth the word and say out loud the word God. God grant me. I could say grant me. That was it. Until the day came when I was asked to lead the Serenity Prayer. And then I remember looking around the room to say, what do I do here? And so, for the good of the others, I was compelled to say the word for the rest of the room, because the prayer couldn't have started otherwise. Do you know what? I've had no trouble since that day saying it. Isn't it amazing? Something shifted. Maybe in that moment, without realising it fully, I began to move for the first time beyond myself, because I was thinking of the needs of the others in the room, not my own stuff. I was also ashamed that folk might think I was a God botherer too, because I was attending these meetings in churches mainly. Still am mainly in churches. I remember standing outside a meeting one day and noticing a car with someone I knew pass by. She waved at me, but I turned my head away. Now, she worked for a refugee charity, and I'd been doing some work for her. And when I saw her a few days later, I apologised and explained what I was doing outside that church. I didn't want her to know that I was a God botherer. I was attending church, so I told her that I was going to an AA meeting. It seemed less shameful to be an alcoholic than to be a God botherer, as we so horribly call it these days. Yeah, I was more ashamed that she might think I was into God than an alcoholic or an addict. How the worm turns, eh? How the worm turns. So you get the idea of where I was at and how closed I was, until of course the malady opened me up to new possibility. I had to experience a deeper surrender, a more complete sense of hopelessness. I had to accept that I could not manage my own life, my emotional nature. In this place of utter despair, hope had the potential to grow. I wanted what I could see in others. I accepted that I needed a spiritual solution. Now, this reluctance to wanting a spiritual solution is not uncommon. Most of us want an alternative, don't we? And you know what? It's nothing new in that. It's nothing to do with living in the 21st century. It was the same with the founders. And it's stated several times at the beginning of chapter 4, We Agnostics, on pages 44 to 45. Here we go. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. But after a while we had to face the facts that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Perhaps it's going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Or else. That's quite a threat, isn't it? It certainly was when I was a kid, actually. It's what we used to say. And somebody says to me, say, or else. It's like some kind of threat, really. So we had to find a spiritual way of life that gives us a power by which we can live, or else. That's if you're an alcoholic of the hopeless variety, of course. Some people just stop and can live without it. Remember, that's who it's addressing. What the alcoholic of the hopeless variety, at least anyway, suffers from is lack of power. Therefore, the solution is, of course, to find a power by which you can live. The purpose of the book, and certainly the point of chapter 4, is to show two simple things. Where that power is to be found and what we need to do to access it. We agnostics answers both of these questions specifically. Page 45. Main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. And what's the problem or the dilemma? Same thing, isn't it? The problem, the dilemma is lack of power. So the solution is to find a power, isn't it? Obviously, I think it says that somewhere, doesn't it? One of those one-word sentences that's so powerful in this book. So how do we find the power? Well, it's simple, actually. What we have to do is lay aside prejudice. Put to one side what we think we know, to truly become a skeptic about knowledge in the original understanding of the word, to loosen our grip on certainty, to accept that we lack knowledge, to become agnostic, really. One who lacks knowledge. That's what an agnostic is. Gnosis meaning knowledge. Really, it's a kind of honest humility that opens one up to new possibility. That's what's required. We need to lay aside prejudice. Do you know that the word prejudice appears 7 times in chapter 4 alone, 6 times in the first 4 pages, I think? And what is a prejudice? It's literally a prejudgment, a preconceived idea about something. It's a closed mind. They're the obvious prejudices, but you can be prejudiced about anything. Page 45. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we'd abandoned the God idea entirely. You know, whether a person believes in God or they don't believe in God, they have an idea of what God might be. Either the God they believe in or the God they don't believe in, if you like. It's interesting, there are many, though, different types of word for God or higher power throughout this book. Higher power actually only appears twice in the whole book. And personally, it's a phrase I don't like because it sounds distant and remote. And the truth is, we can use whatever language works for us personally. You can reject every understanding of God that's ever been. Doesn't mean that you can't find a relationship with God. You just need to broaden your horizons. You know what? Today, I do not believe in the God I did not believe in when I came into these rooms. That said, I experienced this power throughout my life and with more intensity as the days go by. I certainly came to believe in a power greater than myself that I can call God today. But I know what I mean by that. You probably think of something completely different when I say that 3-letter word. And that's okay. He has no issue with that. That's for each of us to decide for ourselves. Page 46 describes clearly what we actually need to do here. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or even comprehend that power which is God. I added the even myself there, sorry. So that's it. That is all we need to do here. All we need to do is lay aside prejudice and express a willingness to believe. Note the humility here too. I'll just repeat those words. Even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. No one knows completely. We all see through the glass dimly. We only see a reflection. No one sees the whole of the moon. No one. It is beyond our human capacity to know completely, to know perfectly. Be very wary of anyone who claims otherwise. It would suggest to me that they've closed down. You need humility to remain open to possibility. And that means as much today as it did 17, 18 years ago. It's just as important now as it was then. It must remain humble to stay open. Lay aside what you think you know. There's a lovely prayer about it. You can adapt those words to suit your own understanding. All we need to find is a starting point, somewhere to begin. That's what a conception is, isn't it? For me, all that was required was for me to hold up my hands and say, I don't know, but I'll give it an honest go. That's all that was asked. That's all that was needed to make a start. And so much came as I gave it an honest go. And I had to be honest. But it began with, I don't know. Page 47. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies too to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice that you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all that we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe, or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. But you need your cornerstone. Step 1 was the foundation. And it was this that beat me into a state of reasonableness and enabled me to lay aside my prejudice. This happened as I failed to keep sober, but it also happened when that deeper surrender to my own inner unmanageability. It was this that enabled me to lay aside prejudice and be open to the possibility I don't know was my cornerstone. And I stopped asking other people what they believed while silently ridiculing them, and simply began to ask myself, because that was my other problem. I kept asking other people what they believed when I needed to ask myself. And that began with, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know anything. I just don't know. But I'm willing. Now, much of the rest of chapter 4 is an attempt to argue how we are closed off. And it's in so many ways. It's a valiant effort to argue that we believe in all kinds of things for which there is no absolute proof, but we just accept them anyway. It's a beautiful essay in many ways. That said, I don't believe it will convince a person either way. What convinced me and so many others was being beaten into a state of reasonableness by this malady. This, and only this, made me willing to lay aside prejudice and to begin to search, to ask myself, because I did not know. I did not know. So they've told us how, but where do we search for the answer? Well, that's already been hinted at, actually. So they've already kind of hinted at that. As I've already stated, the mistake I made was to ask others, when in truth, I needed to ask myself. Here the book puts it beautifully at the bottom of page 46. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. And isn't that good to know, that no one is excluded? Recovery is open to all who are capable of honestly seeking it. Harry Emerson Fosdick, a great supporter and promoter of early AA and the noted clergyman mentioned in the foreword to the second edition, said that this was the real genius of the programme, that no one was excluded who wanted it. There was no requirement of wholeness for membership. It was open. And it's also important to note that the book was written in the days before gender-neutral language. Men and man in those days meant the whole of humanity. It was not specifically about male gender. The word man comes from the Proto-Germanic word man, which spelt M-A-N-N, which meant person, the whole of humanity. It had nothing to do with gender. And it's the same with the word he, which was also gender neutral until the middle of the 20th century, before the book was written. So man, he and him do not refer exclusively to the male gender, but to all human beings. So it's important to remember that when reading this book. The world's changed, thank goodness, since then. So where to find the power? So we know how to find the power. The question now is, where do we find it? Where is it hidden, if you like? Because it seems to be hidden. I can't see it in the world. That's certainly how I felt. And I remember when I was first told the answer to this that I shuddered. I was told that, like step 1, the answer could be found by looking deep within myself. Well, that utterly terrified me. And I've discovered since that I am not the only one. I'm in good company there. Bill had a similar problem. Folk often say that Bill was an agnostic. He wasn't, you know. I'm not convinced at all. When you read his story, it suggests actually that he was a kind of deist, really. Not a theist at all, no. He was a deist of some type, anyway. He believed in a creator of the universe that set the laws of life in motion, but could not believe what he could not believe in was a God that could help him, a God personal to him. He believed in something that set the laws of nature in motion, but not something he could have a relationship with, that could be personal to him. So that sounds like deism to me. Here's what he said in his story on pages 10 and 11. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. Judging from what I'd seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. I really identify with that, and I've met so many others that do too. I believed that I was the most disgusting piece of dog shit, and yet right in the centre of the universe. I saw no goodness in life, and I certainly saw none in me. It seemed to me that if there was a power at work in life, it was a dark one. So who on earth would turn to that? And yet, like Bill, I could see other examples. But I didn't want to see it, or I was frightened to see it perhaps. And not forgetting, of course, Bill also had his experience at the cathedral mentioned right at the beginning of his story. It's there in the second paragraph of his story, and it's there because it was so crucial to him. Don't ignore it. It's really important. It's there for a very good reason, and he goes back to it on another 2 occasions in his story. Bill also had the example of Ebbe, and I had my own examples if I'm really honest, but I couldn't see them at the time. I had the folks in the rooms, and I had someone in my life. So like Bill, I began to ask questions of myself and my own personal experiences. As I've said, I couldn't see God or even goodness in me at this time. That said, there was a little lad in my life, a lad called Ethan. He was 3 years old at the time, and I could see that there was something of love and beauty in him. He was love and beauty. I could see that great reality deep within him. It shone out of him. So what I did was reason that when I was 3 years old, that's who I had been. I used my reason correctly, which is what the program asked me to do. I used my mind appropriately. I asked myself that question, and that was enough to make just to move a little further, to make another beginning, if you like. A concept came into view, even more than I don't know. A real concept began to form, and that was way more than enough for step 2, way more. So things began to open, things began to shift. I began to doubt my doubts. I began to lay aside my prejudice, what I thought I knew. Page 55. For deep down in every man, woman and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. Pay attention to the facts, folks. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. We can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself, then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. Wow. With this attitude, you cannot fail. What a promise. And that was certainly the case for me, as it's been for millions of others. And it's important to note that the journey of faith, the journey of recovery, is a broad highway. Broader than I can draw with my arms. Way out there. Way. It's not a narrow path. And all we got to do is get on the road. Just turn down that road. and I was ready to turn to the solution and abandon myself utterly, and I did. And you know what? No matter what has happened since, nothing has shaken that sense of faith that came from my experiences. I have doubted. Of course I doubted. I'll always doubt. My mind will always ask questions. It's meant to ask questions. The moment it stops asking questions is the moment I've lost my mind, I would say. But nothing has shaken. The troubles of life have not shaken the power of that experience. Even the death of Ethan at 6 years old and so many other losses that have followed have never shaken my connection that has grown and strengthened as time has gone by. My heart's been broken with grief and many other things on many occasions, but the connection has remained as I have kept on turning down that broad highway. You can live for the most incredible experiences in recovery, some of which will be excruciatingly painful. They will break your heart into 1,000 pieces. The worst things that you could possibly imagine could happen may well happen, because they happen to us all. Got nothing to do with recovery or this illness. That's just the reality of existence, of life. But that power can always be alive within you if you keep on turning towards it and keep on turning to life, doing what you're here to do. I absolutely guarantee you that 100%, for it is my experience, and it ain't mine alone, so that's good to know, innit? Here, stated on pages 56 to 57. Thus was my friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No later vicissitude has shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away that very night years ago. It disappeared. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink has never returned. And at such times a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. And isn't that the ultimate promise of recovery? Being restored to sanity. That place of neutrality where you cannot drink. That's the whole point of recovery, isn't it? Where you can live in the world free. You just got to stay free. Step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. It's the whole point of it all. So to sum it up, I suppose, this brings us to the 3 pertinent ideas found on page 60. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. 3. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. C, that God could and would if he were sought. These 3 pertinent ideas. Just repeating what we've already learnt in a really short form. Maybe I should have just read them 3 out instead of the last hour and a half, nearly 2 hours. Maybe not then. Now, when I sponsor, I like to play a little trick here. And it's not just for sport, although I do quite enjoy it, but to help the man that I'm working with to open up his way of thinking. I ask what steps these 3 pertinent ideas are referring to. And what's fascinating is that in almost every time that we do this, they say steps 1, 2 and 3. We then go through the 3 pertinent ideas and I ask him to explain why he says the steps 1, 2 and 3. Eventually, after much discussion, it's usually accepted that A and B are step 1 and C is essentially step 2, but it isn't always. Some of us like to wrestle more than others, and we do not like to lay aside what we think we know, do we? So if they still won't accept it, we then turn to the next sentence to prove that C is in fact not step 3, that C is another way of saying step 2 essentially. The beginning of the next sentence. Being convinced, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? So being convinced of the 3 pertinent ideas, then you're at step 3. Makes sense really when you think about it, doesn't it? So we're ready to turn here, to turn down the path to the solution, to choose the spiritual way of life rather than the alcoholic death, an option that's discussed many times in those previous chapters. And they explain what they mean by that and what needs to be done here on page 60. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the plays in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he is more likely to have varied traits. Now note here, it's important to note this. There is no suggestion that this is a characteristic unique to an alcoholic or an addict. No, not at all. Most people live this way, and it's this that causes most of the troubles in our world. Just look at our world. So here they begin to talk about the spiritual malady, which I said I would discuss last week, didn't I? Life does not go the way we want it, so we exert our will more, or we surrender ourselves to another to sort our lives out for us. And things just go ever more wrong. And what do we do when they go ever more wrong? We blame the world for all our troubles. That's what resentments are essentially. The most common manifestation of this, of self. By the way though, sometimes everything goes the way we want it to, and still we're not satisfied, because there is no true satisfaction to be found here. We still complain about the sad state of everything, not just the nation. All you got to do is spend a day on social media. Look at those posts on Facebook from the last 24 hours of the people you know in your life. Have a look. You'll see it's full of it. Here's the killer line from page 61. Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness from this world if he only manages well? Victim of the delusion. Now, a point of interest here. Often we hear talk about denial with regards to this illness. There's even an acronym you may have heard for denial. Don't even know I am lying. Well, I'm sorry, but there's 2 obvious problems with this. First one is know is spelt K-N-O-W and not N-O, isn't it? So don't even know I am lying does not spell denial, it spells dekial. But also, if you do not know you are lying, you are not suffering from denial, you are deluded. I did not know I was playing God, that I was trying to manage everything. You will actually only find the word denial in this book once, and that's in Bill's story when he's speaking specifically about his grandfather's problems with religion. Now, this book refers to the delusion or the illusion, which is a much deeper state than denial. I could not see the truth about this malady. Well, not at least not until I sincerely shared step 5 with someone who understood. Then I saw the truth. And if I'd refused to see the truth after then I'd be in denial. But before that, I was deluded. I just did not know. I did not know the truth, and I could not see it. So I was not denying it. I was incapable of even seeing it. But not anymore. And more is revealed as life goes on, by the way, more and more about my inability to see things. But once you see them, you can't turn away anymore. You see, the spiritual malady is simply this idea that we can do it ourselves, that we can manage everything ourselves. What page 62 describes as selfishness and self-centeredness. When I was that tiny piece of dog shit in the core of the universe, actually. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. And the solution is to let our roots grasp a new soil and to live from this new place, this power greater than ourselves. Because the truth is, you cannot defeat self with self. Of course you can't, it doesn't make sense. And paradoxically, we don't need to go anywhere to find it though. We just need to engage on the spiritual journey of depth, not the spiritual journey of distance. 1 inch, but fathoms deep. It's already there. We've just got to let it out. I don't need to let God in. I need to let God out, is what I've learnt. God's in everything, and I need to let that of God live through me. Anyway, back to the malady. To quote page 62. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. But it's not the only example, that's important. Above everything, and that means above, there's nothing more important than this. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. Do you know what? The first thing you need to do in order to begin to form a relationship with this power and to live by this power is to quit playing God. To live under new management, if you like. God directing, giving us the power, and we living by that power and playing a full role in life. Being responsible. We need to let God live in and through us. Not ask God what we want God to do, but ask God what God wants us to do. And ask God to enable us to access the power and go and do it. To live by it. Not just to believe in it or experience it, but to actually live by and from it. Step 3 is not some passive act where we just hand it all over to God and expect to have it all sorted out for us. If you think about it logically, that would be asking God to do our will. God offers direction and God offers strength, but the action is always ours. God is the director, but we have to play our role in life. When I look at my life, I did as much damage, if not more actually, by not doing what I was supposed to do. Not so much imposing my will on others. Well, that's how it, I suppose, if you like. That was me playing God. You see, I play God by not engaging with life, by refusing to engage with life, by running away, by not living the life I had been given. And today, if I get myself in trouble today, it's usually the same. It ain't so much what I do, it's what I refuse to do. It's what I turn away from or expect others to do for me. This is about responsibility, this. It's about not playing God, but it's about playing your role fully and completely in life. That's perfect love, by the way. So we turn down the path. We turn to God because living from self has failed utterly. If you want to develop a conscious relationship with God, the first thing you have to do is to quit playing God. Your roots grasping new soil, so you are no longer living from self, which is the root of our troubles. Pretty logical, really. And then you're no longer ruled by the spiritual malady. And as we do, we begin to become conscious of his presence. It's not that you believe, you're conscious. You can't fail but to believe. That would be to deny reality. This is what's called being reborn, if you like, because it's a kind of rebirth, a new beginning, a new start, a conversion experience, to use religious language. But it is only a beginning. All you've done is change direction. Actually, you've not gone anywhere yet. It's interesting, just a point of interest. The word conversion comes from the Latin word convertere, which meant to turn or to return. So we begin the process of recovery as we turn, as we begin to take action. And this action is what will relieve us of the spiritual malady that will set us free from this illness. Remember, we're given two options if you're the real alcoholic: an alcoholic death or a spiritual way of life. And we need to make that decision. What is our choice to be? That decision is what we make at step 3. Because we don't want to die in this hideous, slow, horrible death. But the decision is only a beginning. We must continue. Keep on walking down the road. I'm going to share a bit of my experiences around when step 3 kind of happened in my life, if you like, when it actually happened, not just theory here. Experience and knowledge, I said. Experience and knowledge. Well, I've shared much knowledge. Here's some experience. I awoke on October the 10th, 2004. I was exactly 1 year physically sober. And for the first time in my life, I believe I surrendered utterly to the day. I turned to something greater than myself, and I accepted whatever life offered to me that day. I went to my home group where I was setting up. I then went afterwards to another meeting. While there, an old timer said he was going to Blackpool that night, and did I fancy a ride out? We could go to a meeting there, he said. I said, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. How could I say no to that? So off we went with another friend who came along for the ride. I sat in the back because she doesn't sit in the back apparently. We had a lovely walk on the seafront, some chips by the sea, and then we went to the meeting. They offered the old timer the opportunity to give the main share, but he said, no, let Danny, it's his first birthday. And this was the first time I ever fully told my tale in a meeting. It was a powerful and deeply emotional experience, although I have absolutely no memory of what I said. I can kind of guess, because your story's your story, isn't it? After thanks and some cake, again lovely, we head off back to Manchester. Me again, sat in the back, because she doesn't sit in the back, apparently. Now, I'm not sure exactly what happened, as I'd gone quiet, sat there in the back all alone. But something was occurring deep within me. Apparently the car almost crashed, and the two in the front were panicking and shouting at one another, but I was in some other place, kind of oblivious to what was going on. I felt this deepening sense of connection. I did not feel alone. I felt held by something, and I felt it right in the core of my being. A deepening sense of this growing consciousness had come over me. I was not living from self, from that spiritual malady. I was living from someplace else. My roots were beginning to grasp a new soil. A few days later, I formally made the decision, and I wrote and shared my inventory 4 and 5 immediately, really. The first time I'd gone through the steps, I did 2 and 3 were kind of just skipped over, because I use the rooms as a higher power, and I certainly would not pray. But really, truth be told, I didn't really do it. I just skipped them, really. My mind was closed. And as a result, what was revealed in step 4 the first time, it really didn't touch anything. I could not see the truth because I was not in a place where I could accept the truth. But a few days later, after that experience, I formally took step 3. And they offer a lovely prayer, which is the decision, if you like, the starting point, if you like. Note at the end of this prayer, there is no Amen. Note at the end of step 7, there is. Interesting point. I'll talk about that next week, perhaps. Next time. It is suggested we take step 3 with someone as sponsors. A really good idea here. You can do it with more than one person if you wish, but if you can't find someone, you can do it alone. I've done it with more than one person. It's quite powerful, actually. It also suggests if we don't like the language, or we want some language that's more appropriate, some of it's quite old worldly, isn't it? Maybe gender neutral language, I don't know, female, any kind of language, whatever works for us as an individual. The pioneers of AA all wrote their own. They kind of had to, actually. It does not say you must be on your knees, although that was the tradition, and it's what I would normally do, but there are people I've worked with that don't feel comfortable doing that. Do you know what? That's okay. It's okay. On your knees did not make the final cut of the book. You don't have to pray on your knees. You really don't. But I prefer to. And it works just as powerfully through Zoom. You are face to face in a different way, but we have to do it these days at the moment, or certainly at this time. And, in the early days they had to adapt. Some people were completely alone. They were sponsored by the mail, by post. So let's remember that AA's always had to adapt, and so have the other fellowships too. Step 3 is just a beginning, but sometimes this decision can be very powerful. I've been with people who have had extremely powerful experiences here at this moment. I remember a man just about a year ago going through this, and he had a power, and as I walked back in the room after leaving him after we'd done this, I could sense it in the room, and that man's life has never been the same since, but you could feel something had shifted in the room itself. Just near here, actually. Powerful. What we have to be, though, is sincere here. Sincerity is vital, and vital meaning life-giving. If you're not sincere, it's not going to work, you're not going to live. Sincerity is one of the true spiritual principles of recovery. If you fake this, it's very highly you're not going to make it. They say fake it to make it. I would never say that. Give it an honest go with all your doubts, but don't pretend. It's not going to work. It's not going to bring about the results. Sincerity is one of the vital principles of recovery. Even if you bring all your doubts when you make this decision, the miracle can still happen if you give this an honest go. That's what I prefer to say. Give it an honest go. Just give it a go. Do you want to just take this prayer with me? I'll just say the words if you want to just still yourselves in whatever way works for you. And I'll share the words of the prayer. We were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. The keystone that they talk about is step 3. We build the arch to freedom. The foundation, step 1. The cornerstone, step 2. The keystone, step 3. So we have, and that's a decision to walk down that path, to turn, to change direction. So we've made the decision to walk down the pathway to recovery. But actually that's all we've done, nothing more. We have chosen the spiritual way of life rather than the alcoholic death. But this means nothing unless we take the action. All we have done is change direction, if you like. We have turned. We have been reborn. But that's all, nothing more. Nothing else has been done here. If we do nothing else, we will still perish. A decision without action means absolutely nothing. It's just a decision. And I love the story of the three frogs that Joe and Charlie tell. I think it beautifully illustrates this point. I'm sure you know it. Use your imagination though. Just picture three little green frogs sitting happily on a log. Picture them in your mind. Suddenly, one of the three frogs decided to jump off the log. How many frogs are left sitting on the log? How many? Well, the usual answer is 2. But is that true? Did any of the frogs leap off the log? Well, actually, the truth is we don't know because we're not told whether they did or not. All that we are told is that the frog made a decision to leap off the log, not that the frog actually did so. Yeah, I love this illustration. It speaks powerfully to me. It's a simple story and I'm a simple man, so I need a simple tale. It teaches me that whatever we may say, think or even believe means very little unless it is followed by appropriate action. Unless we can have as much faith as we want, but if we don't act in that faith, it is meaningless. It means nothing. Faith without works is dead. So we have to launch out. You can see the frog leaping, can't you? We have to launch out on a vigorous course of action. The first step of which is step 4, the personal house cleaning, the inventory, which I'll talk about next time. So I hope that helps. That's it on the solution, the power, and of course the decision. I look forward to talking about the action that follows this vigorous course of action, how we access the power, if you like. Essentially, steps 4 through to 9 in the next share. But that's enough for now. So until next time, may God bless us all. Let's keep on rocking in the free world. We groovers and shakers. Let's stay free. Stay free. Amen.